listen in, but we would appreciate questions kind of related more directly to clients you're currently working with. For those of you who don't have current EQIP applications that you're needing to get through CART and ProTrax and CD, that's great. Please sit in and learn. We will be coming out with additional information to help you navigate EQIP and conservation planning in the urban setting at a later date once we're out from under these EQIP deadlines. Okay. So anyways, I just want to welcome everybody. But again, questions are welcome, but primarily from those of you who have site-specific questions that you kind of need to rattle some things through us on. We may not have all the answers right now, and please accept that as okay, but we will get you an answer so that you can get everything done by that March 18th deadline. Okay. So anyways, thank you for joining us again. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Stephanie, and we will walk through what we have prepared for you. Just as a reminder, please, we do want this to be interactive. We want to hear what your questions are, hear what's not clear, and we'll work on the answers together to help you navigate your upcoming deadlines. Thank you.
Hey, Shannon, thanks so much for that introduction and kind of kicking the ball off for this information sharing meeting and discussion today. So my role is to kind of give you guys a little bit of a background of why we're meeting here today and kind of what brought us to this point. So what we're going to first look at here is today's agenda. So that's a brief history of the planning decisions that got us here. And then we're going to spend some time with Kevin as he goes through the urban planning toolkit. That's the term that I'm kind of starting to get used to using, our urban ag planning toolkit. And Kevin will be discussing some specific examples within our mulching guidance document. And then Jennifer will be going over conservation desktop guidance pertaining to working in urban farms or working on urban farms and in small farm settings. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion about other conservation practices that can be used and applied on our urban and small farms. And then we have some additional updates or additional guidance, and a mulching photo library is we're going to kind of use the library, even though it says second to last. The library is going to be the last thing that we close out on, hopefully using those photos to get the juices flowing on the work that you're doing in the field with urban producers and showing some examples of what's been done in different parts of the state already. So why are we here today? Why are we working on some of these things? And you all know this because we're all at this meeting today, and many other people are aware of USDA's commitment to urban ag. I would say renewed commitment or reinvigorated commitment to urban ag with some of the work that the chief has been doing, really prioritizing urban ag, looking at having some urban county committees, having those special details that people are working on to do urban practices and really highlighting that information across the country. I was on the teleconference last week, Friday, for the Urban Ag Regional Teleconference. And as I looked through the names, I saw a lot of you on that teleconference as well. So you all know that this is a kind of an exciting time for, again, elevating urban agriculture. So the other thing that we really wanted to think about is how can we streamline and kind of simplify this process, right? We all know that we're really good at working with our farmers and doing great conservation planning, but then we take that work that we've done with the farmer on the landscape, and then we got to take that and put it into business tools and put it potentially into a conservation contract. And sometimes, especially with small farms, that gets really difficult. And so we're hoping to use these guidance documents that we've been developing on a case-by-case basis for conservation practices to develop this urban ag planning toolkit. So just briefly, it all started with a phone call from Jared Chu. Thank you, Jared. You get a call out today. And the urban soil health specialists, Ellie Blaine and Kevin, Allison and Tony, and we started talking about how to streamline that planning process so we can continue to provide sound customer service, but not spend so much time getting hung up on the backside where we have to put everything into the system so that they can receive financial assistance. We developed a list of conservation practices, which is quite an extensive list that could be utilized or have the technical capacity to be utilized on urban lands. And then we kind of evaluated those practices and got to work on the priority ones. So this is I'm not going to call it an inclusive list or an exhaustive list, but let's just say it's a pretty extensive list of conservation practices that could be applicable to urban farms. Technically, let's just say they have the technical concept or technical ability to be applied on urban farms, but the ones that are in bold are really the practices, the conservation practices that have small scale scenarios. So as we started to look at some of those practices that you saw from the last slide that were bolded, we kind of started to review those practices and looked at how they're planned, what are the planning units that are being used in those practices. And I'm going to skip ahead a slide here just for this visual. And one of the things that we saw here is that we have a lot of conservation practices that we apply on urban land. But the team that I was working with, we started to notice, and we knew this already, but again, it just started to hit home more and more, that the unit types for these conservation practices was running the gamut from acres to numbers to 1,000 square feet. And this constantly changing unit type between the payment scenarios has to make conservation planning difficult and contracting difficult for our conservation planners, because you're always having to wait, stop. Am I thinking about acres? Or am I thinking about numbers? Or am I thinking about square feet or 1,000 square feet? And what information do I need to collect to do quality conservation planning? And so with this slide here, the one thing that is really important to note is for sure from the conservation practice of cover crops on down, within our business tools, those practices are identified as acre practices or polygon practices. So they're planned on that acre scale. Yet when you go in to schedule an agreement item and develop the conservation plan and contract, all of a sudden that unit type changes to the specific ones you see here: acre, number, 1,000 square feet. So again, it makes a lot of that planning process difficult, or not, maybe not difficult, but again, extra work. And so the thing that I want to hit on here is this last bullet, is that in the discussions that we were having, one of the things that we came home to over and over again is that planning on the square foot, if we start thinking about urban and small farms that we're looking at square foot and planning that way and collecting data on that square foot basis, will allow planning decisions to kind of flow from that size to all the other planning units. It's a pretty simple calculation to go from square foot to acre, and another simple calculation to go from, square foot to 1,000 square feet. And if we have a decent constant, it's a pretty simple step to go from square foot to number. So the first practice that we took on was mulching. Why mulching, is everyone's wondering. I think that in discussions with Kevin and Jared and Ellie, mulch has the potential to be used very often in conservation planning. If any of you were on the IASWCD Urban Ag updates this morning, Ellie had invited 3 farmers from Marion County to be on there to talk about their farms. And it was like listening to the Brady Bunch, Marsha, 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 but instead it was mulching, mulching, mulching over and over again. Those farmers talked about how they use mulching to control weeds, how they use mulching to manage moisture, the role that mulching plays in their operations. So this practice is really important. But with important practices comes a potential for things to get complicated real fast, because again, mulching can be applied in so many different diverse and unique methods. What type of mulch is it? How deep is the mulch? How long is the mulch out there? Do you do mulch for all crops? You're getting the point here. But again, that's why we picked mulching and started working on it right away. But let's just stop here a second and think about pulling back the layers of all of this detail and focusing on the conservation planning efforts that we can provide, right? As conservation planners, the thing we want to go back to is, what is the intended purpose of this practice? And if you go back into the practice standard and you kind of read about this, it lists a whole series of practices or purposes, and then it even goes into additional considerations that you can look at to help build the purposes behind this practice. The other thing in here too is when we developed the user guide this past year, we tried to put some things in to kind of help this streamline this planning process for this practice from an urban standpoint. So again, we talked about wanting to use 100% ground cover or about 100% ground cover to suppress weeds that are competing with our annual and perennial crops. The scenarios within mulching are listed as high tunnel. So they say mulching in high tunnels, but we decided to expand that further, that this mulching guidance that is focusing on urban and small farm areas, we decided to also take it out of the high tunnel and put it on those urban and small farm areas that we typically find in and around farms that also have high tunnels. And so we started to try to put that information together to kind of help streamline this process. Ultimately, we really want to think about weed suppression in this for the purposes of planning with this practice for sure this year, just really thinking about suppressing those weeds. But the resource concerns we need to plan for is thinking about whether or not pesticides are used. Then we want to focus on pesticides transporting to groundwater or surface water. And again, if pesticides are not used, we're thinking about plant pest pressure resource concerns. So again, trying to streamline that process as you're working with that farmer and the details that you need to plug in behind the scenes. So the last two slides I think that I'm hitting on here is just a word about the fact that a lot of this planning guidance is still evolving just a little bit. In our user guide, when we originally put the user guide out, we talked about determining the number for mulching units based on the length of the bed and dividing that by 50. But in the updated guidance, I'm going to grab my laser pointer here. In the updated guidance, we've decided to kind of try to focus on looking at a square footage basis. So we kind of carried that just a little bit further into, instead of just the length and divided by 50, we started talking about a number equaling a set area or a set square foot area. And the reason why we continue to, why this is still evolving is that 200 square foot, it's still based on a typical bed length of 50 feet long. We just started to put a width on it because we started to realize that there's so much variation between bed widths across urban farms. And so instead of just looking at length, we decided to look at square feet. Plus, we thought this would simplify our process by allowing the planners to digitize measuring instead of just looking at length. So if you pull up Google Maps and you draw a polygon around something, that would help in that pre-planning process. And then lastly, when we look at practice implementation for many of these small and urban farm practices, they're scheduled on the square foot. So why not get it up front? And so what are we going to do this year? If you're already neck deep in planning urban practices on your EQIP applications with urban farms, and you're already doing all of these things, please continue to use the existing guidance in the user guide. That is the set guidance, and that's what we are going to fall back to if we have to. That's what we're going to use. But if you haven't started yet on some of these applications, please start thinking about using the mulching guidance that we're going to be showing you today. We're hoping that this will streamline the process, and it will definitely be something that we're going to use for next year's planning. So the reason why we really are going back to this is we really want to think about where mulch is needed the most for weed suppression. Is it needed in the growing bed? Is it needed in the walkways? It's needed in both. And so that's, again, that kind of hones in on why we're looking at square feet instead of just length of beds, because we decided to encompass the walkways with the beds to help streamline this process. All right, so that was my little over 10 minutes here. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to, oh, sorry, Shannon, yes?
Stephanie, let's see if there's any questions before we.
That's what I was going to do. Thanks.
Oh, my bad.
And while I'm waiting for questions, I was going to stop sharing my screen and pull up the Word document. So anyone, if you have any questions, type them in the chat or please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Currently nothing in the chat.
I will add just one additional statement to what Stephanie covered. And again, we are focusing on that plant pest pressure resource concern. As Stephanie mentioned, mulch has a whole host of applications on an urban farm, moisture, plant productivity and health, all these other resource concerns. But the application or the specification of how to mulch for moisture control is going to be different than for weed control, let's say. So that's kind of why we focused on that one, to have a consistent approach, knowing that the other benefits will come if we also plan mulch according to controlling weeds. So just a little extra information there is why we chose that.
All right, Kevin.
Great.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Awesome.
Can you see
yeah.
this on the screen okay? Does that work for you?
It does. Yes. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, just a reiteration of what Stephanie said. She spoke about like starting with square feet and then having that equal a number, or working from square feet up, right? So for the mulching scenarios, we determined that 200 square feet would equal one number. So pretty much to get when you're planning with the grower, the square feet, or in turn numbers, would like to be scheduled on that site, then you would just calculate the total square footage of area to be mulched, and that includes the beds and the walkways that would be mulched, and divide by 200, and that will get you the number. And then you would just round up to the next whole number. And we'll show some examples that show that math as well. So again, include the growing beds and the associated walkways. There will be instances where the bed and the walkway may be mulched differently. So you'll notice that in the mulching scenario, there's two mulching scenarios, one for natural mulch and one for synthetic. So more like black plastics and landscape fabric, whereas natural might be straw or leaf mulch. So if the bed the growing bed is comprised of or is to be mulched in a certain, like if it's going to be mulched with natural, then also include the walkways as natural mulch as well. So you would take that whole area. So documentation for the case file, just like the examples that I'm going to be showing are decent examples of what you might be able to put in the case file. So the examples are just ways of developing that mulching number with the grower. So I think, Stephanie, with that, maybe we can just slide right into the examples. There you go. Okay, so this is a typical urban farm, right? You would see a growing bed that might be 30 inches wide and 18-inch walkways in the middle of them. So at sometimes if you're planning, like let's say we're planning mulching with a grower, and he or she might not know exactly where on these certain, like which bed exactly on his farm is going to be mulched, but they might know that 20 of their beds in their crop rotation need to be mulched because it's garlic or something favorable to mulching. So the grower and the plant planner know that 20 beds are going to be mulched. So instance, you would, I think the picture might be better if we were to put, imagine the 30-inch bed and then 9 inches of walkway on each side of that bed. So basically it's the bed and half the walkway. So let's say the grower plans to do 20 beds. You would take the area of the walkway, or of the bed and the associated walkway, which would be length times width, and you would get then multiply by the number of beds, and you would get the total area to be mulched. So in this case, it's 6,000 square feet. Divide that by the 200 square foot default area size for planning, and you would get the number 30 for scheduling. Any questions on that? I think you can go ahead.
All right. I was just gonna just scroll up just a little bit. So again, when Kevin was talking about that 4 foot wide bed width, again, that's a 30-inch bed and the 18-inch walkway, equals how we got to that 4 feet. And then the standard length of those beds were 75 feet long. I really think this picture frames a lot of this discussion. It helps you visualize really well what's going to be happening out there. All right. Kevin,
Yeah.
I'm going to zoom out here just a little bit so that we can get the picture and the example in here, but I don't want to zoom out too far. So hopefully you can tell me if that still is visual or still able to be seen well.
Yeah, looks good. Yeah, so let's say the grower does know and where exactly on their farm it's going to be mulched, and maybe using a visual would help in determining the mulch area. So in this case, you know, the grower knows that plots A and D will be mulched with natural materials like straw. So it's a pretty simple there. We would take we would add the area of A plus D, divide by 200. And in this case, the total is 4,300 square feet, divide by 200 square feet default area size, and you get 21.5. So then we'd round up to the next whole number and schedule 22 numbers for mulching with natural materials in that scenario. So let's say that, can you scroll down just a shade, Stephanie, please?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so the grower also knows that in their high tunnels, they're going to be using synthetic mulch. So realize that synthetic mulch and natural mulches are two different scenarios. So they will also schedule synthetic materials. So in this case, it would be taking the area of both those high tunnels where they're going to be mulching, the area to be mulched, divided by 200, and you get the default area size for planting as being 7. So schedule 7 numbers for mulching with synthetic materials this year, and 22 numbers for mulching with natural materials. Okay.
How's everyone doing?
Yeah, and in this, you know, and in a sense, like we kind of talked about 2 different approaches, right? One looking at it like more of a map based, where the grower knows maybe exactly, you know, that this whole plot's going to be mulched. Whereas in the first case scenario, is developing and trying to figure out you know, how much the grower wants to mulch that given year. It's more the planner and the grower are looking at it more. This amount of beds, there's going to be a certain crop, and we know that this grower likes to mulch that. So it's just kind of 2 different approaches to helping the grower determine about how much area, and then in turn numbers to be scheduled. Maybe the next one, Stephanie.
So there is a question in here, Kevin, and it might be a combination of who needs to answer this. Is there a limit on the mulching of walkways? For instance, is there a requirement that the mulching of the walkway should be tied to a growing bed or not account for more than the mulching of the beds?
Great question, and it's definitely something that we've been talking about. I mean, feel free to jump in, but yep, go ahead.
I'll answer that.
Yep.
So again, it depends on the resource concern, and you know, how are they controlling weeds in those non growing bed areas, the walkways. So typically our urban growers may use mulch. They may use a perennial plant, you know. So if mulch will be used to control weeds in those areas, then we're saying that we are treating that resource concern, and it can be included in the calculation, and it should be included in the calculation. Again, we're trying to either reduce pesticide loss and or help control weeds with other methods, more natural methods through our mulching. I hope that answers your question, Susie, or Cindy, I'm sorry.
In addition to that, like Kevin had said, we are continuing to talk about these questions and actually using these scenarios that Kevin has developed, putting different mulching practices and applying it to them and see how this works, to see if it makes sense as we run through developing scenarios and using and looking at the payment rates and stuff like that. So it's a continuing process because every site is so unique.
And just another way to think about that too. Again, all of our decisions, remember, start with a conservation plan and a conservation planning effort. And so again, If we identify the resource concern on the walkways or on the beds, then again, this is a method to treat that resource concern using our programs. So we don't want to be limiting any more than we need to, especially if we leave a resource concern out there on the table. So, but again, there's other methods in the walkways than natural materials or synthetic materials for controlling weeds. And if the farmer already has it under control, then that's another way to look at it. So good question.
Okay, so in this example, you can kind of see what that is. It's basically just a square full of, I think, 24 raised beds. So each bed in this situation, these are constructed raised beds. You can see the boards around them. Each bed is 4 feet wide by 8 feet long. So 32 square foot each. And the total of all the beds is 768 square feet. 24 beds times 32 square feet per bed. So the total area of this practice area is 3,000 square feet, or the area that's kind of on this site is 3,000 square feet. So let's go through a couple options or scenarios. In 2022, the grower will mulch 24 beds with straw and their associated walkways with wood chips for weed control. In 2023, the grower will only mulch 12 beds, and the grower and planter determine that no extra mulching will be needed for walkways at this site. So this kind of goes back to Shannon, addressing the resource concern. Is there a resource concern for weeds? If there is, it needs to be addressed. So can you scroll down just a shade? So the math on that would be, 2022. Okay, since we were mulching with natural materials, both the top growing beds and the walkways, that whole area would be considered under the mulching. So that's 3,000 square feet divided by 200, and you get 15 numbers. So schedule 15 numbers for mulching materials. And then the following year, since only 12 beds are going to be mulched, then you would just take the square footage of that bed, which comes out to be 12 times 32 square feet, 12 beds times 32 square feet, 384 square feet divided by 200, and you get 1.92 numbers. Round that up and you get 2 numbers to schedule. Is there any questions on that?
And I think another thing to add here is that in all cases, we're talking about rounding up, no matter where we end up here, correct?
Yes.
This one looks easy when it's at 1.92, but it could have been at 1.22, and we're still going to round up.
There's no further questions on the map. If you could just scroll ahead a little bit, Stephanie, please.
Kevin, do you want me to quick go over the practice implementation part here before you?
Yep, that sounds good.
So in this guidance document, we also kind of started to put together some supporting information to help with practice implementation and payment certification and mulch. So again, some of the guidance that we've put in here just comes right from the practice standard, and just kind of looking at other mulching guidance that we've seen across the country. But looking at mulch being applied to the soil surface as soon as it is practical within the growing season. So again, think about transplants, tomatoes, and others, and putting that straw mulch around those plants. We want to have the previous year's mulches will be removed from the growing bed in order to prepare that bed for this year's crops. After the crop is planted, new mulches can be applied to the depth required based on the type of mulch that's going out there. Once the mulching activity is completed, the planner complete a site visit to determine if the practice meets specs, and from there they can either certify the practice, or if additional work is needed to get the practice to meet the specifications, at that point in time they would have the farmer do that as well. So again, a pretty easy site visit, checking for depths or materials being applied out there, a picture for a case file. Those are the things that will support payment certification. And then when it comes to maintenance of the mulch, we really want to see that that mulch is maintained, reinstalled, or repaired as needed to accomplish the intended purpose, which again, we're looking at weed suppression during the growing season and overwintering period. So if you have cover crops that are being planted in those growing beds during the off season, this will accomplish the intended purpose. So it's not like the grower could use cover crops, use mulching during the growing season, pull the mulching off, seed the bed with cover crops during the winter, and still be accomplishing that intended purpose. But we're really wanting to focus on trying to meet the intended purpose of suppressing weeds at all times when we can.
Okay, so since and as Shannon mentioned, like mulch can be used in so many ways on a small farm. Even just a slight bit, can help with soil health. But for this, to meet the purposes of weed control, which we are trying to do here, or which we're doing here, we came to the realization that we kind of needed a mulch depth as kind of a minimum to go on. So for the purposes of these two scenarios, the mulch must provide 100% coverage, soil coverage, and attain a minimum depth of at least one layer for synthetic materials, and then anchor appropriate black plastic or landscape fabric. And then if it's a natural material, then 2 inches would be the minimum for that. So there is some nuances there. If you put down, if you were to apply 6 inches of straw, for example, on top of the bed, eventually, or it will decompose, right? But over time, it will compress to about 2 inches. And I know, like, there's nuances there that it might go down to 3, it might be going down to 1.5. Like, straw is very fickle, I guess, in that and diverse in that regard. But in general, if you put about 6 inches on, it would end up about a 2-inch mat. So to kind of measure it out or to think about the minimum, press down on the straw to do the measuring or to do the figuring. So a 6-inch cover pressed down would be 2 inches deep, and that would meet the minimum for mulching to control weeds or to address that resource concern. Okay. We can go down a little bit, Stephanie, please. So just to show you kind of what kinds of mulches you might see wanting to be used, just realize that there are a diversity. They've all got their own attributes. However, these are some of the most common ones that we see on farms. So straw, it's lightweight, it's fairly accessible. There are chances that there's chemical residues in weed seeds, so knowing where that straw came from and asking questions is helpful. Same thing with hay, in the sense that it could have weed seeds, but also pretty beneficial mulch. Then shredded leaves and wood chips are also options. Wood chips, I'm not sure how much we want to get in the technical aspect of this, probably not too much right now, but wood chips on the soil surface as a mulch can be kind of detrimental to annual vegetable crops if it's not done right, if it might be pulling away too much nitrogen from the crop. So however, wood chips is a fairly common pathway mulch. And then synthetic materials, for example, plastic or landscape fabric, use of those would be under the synthetic scenario. Okay, Stephanie?
So Kevin, a couple of questions here I think fit in either here and or just previous. One of those, I know that often multiple crops are rotated within a single crop year. Do mulches get applied multiple times? And then following that, continuing with that, do we contract for multiple applications of mulching?
Yeah. So yeah. Well, I guess first of all, the mulching does have a 1-year lifespan, and so you can schedule 3 years of mulching. One instance for like 10 numbers 1 year, and 10 numbers the next, 10 numbers the next. Stephanie, do you want to take on the maintenance of the mulch?
Yeah, good question, Susanna, with that. So again, if we are looking at a specific bed and we're going to be putting mulch on that bed for the crop that's growing, let's really think about the crops that are most applicable. And Kevin, I might be bouncing these questions to you to answer because right now you're the only one that's unmuted, maybe besides Tony. But like, do you think that typically it's our more longer season vegetable crops where we see mulching used during the growing season?
Yes, yes. I think that's like the majority use would be something like, yeah, 3 months, kind of the 3-month time frame, like a tomato and pepper, potentially squash. So yeah, in general, but like these farms are very diverse, right? And there's sometimes rotating 40 crops through these, these 80 raised beds in a sense. So you will see a lot of stuff going on, like somebody might like mulch their garlic, and then it gets harvested in June, and they might rake off the mulch. This is just like something that a grower might do. They might rake off the mulch and then do like a late summer seeded crop of spinach or something like that. So you do see mulch moving around the farm a little bit, and depending on like they will use certain amounts, right? And some like lettuce, there's not a lot of mulch used just because it's a seeded crop and it's hard to direct seed a mulch. If you were planting like a lettuce transplant, then you might see more mulch wanting to be used on beds like that with transplants. So yeah, it's variable.
And a
If
good
I can
point
answer,
with that. Oh, go on, Shannon.
Go ahead, Stephanie. No, were you going to answer Susanna's question?
To kind of finish it up, yeah, I was going to say that that the mulches, depending on what goes back onto that bed, if after that first crop is removed, and if something goes back onto that bed that still needs the mulch back on there, that we'd be putting it back on there. But in some cases, like Kevin alluded to, we might be putting that bed back to a direct seeded crop like a spinach or a lettuce. And what we tend to see with those direct seeded crops is that those aren't mulched as much, but they're planted really close together and they grow up really fast. So they tend to get decent ground cover pretty quickly in growing those as well. So yes, the mulch, I wouldn't say it would get applied, but you would be putting it back up on that bed if the need is there and for the intended purpose of the mulch. But we wouldn't contract for it on the same bed multiple times in the same year. It's just one time per year that we would contract on that specific bed or that number or that unit that we're talking about. And Shannon, please add on to that. Yeah.
Yeah, to add to that, yeah, just so one payment per year, and then the client is expected to treat their weeds using a natural methods for the year. So even if we have mulch that degrades or is no longer controlling weeds because of whatever reason, I said natural degradation, wind swept or whatever, the maintenance of that would be required to reapply mulch under that single payment as well. But we have talked about, the payment would be issued on the first application of mulch, and then the operator would be expected to maintain that weed protection mulch or whatever throughout the growing season.
There's another question here. It kind of hits on, I think, the mulching scenario and its 1-year lifespan. Kevin, and sorry, Tony, I didn't mean to interrupt there and jump into that question, but Kevin, do you want to talk about, or shall we talk about that one as well? Because it talks about synthetic mulch. In our discussion with synthetic mulch, if the grower was going to put the synthetic mulch down and then leave it there, because sometimes that tends to happen where they leave it on a bed for a couple years, we were only going to pay for that once, because again, that investment in that landscape fabric was made that first time, and so if they're keeping it there for multiple years, that's a benefit, but that wasn't something that we were going to pay on as a practice. Now that being said, if that's something that planners in the group here today have a big concern about, would like to bring that up and and think that that should be changed, then we can certainly look at changing that. But that was some of the discussions that we had up front as to when we think about natural mulch, it's getting purchased every year and put on the farm. But with the synthetic mulch, again, lots of times that investment comes that first time, and then if they keep it on that same bed, there's a big concern about losing the soil health benefits on that bed. So we want to try to look at limiting that as much as possible.
And Stephanie and Kevin, related to that, if we're going to put down the synthetic mulch, use it for a season, take it up, are we able to put it down again? And is that included again as an additional payment then?
I'm gonna ponder on that one, and Shannon, hopefully Shannon, do you want to answer that question? There's a part of me that thinks yes, but then I can also be think no.
We'll get a final decision to everyone on that. Again, there's multiple ways to do this, and we're wanting to make sure we're not getting a counter to program policy. So we will get you an answer to that question. But to answer Jamie's question, yes, synthetic mulch as well as natural mulch is a 1-year lifespan practice. Even though we know synthetics may last more than 1 year, but again, with a lot of the costs that the EQIP scenario is paying for is labor. So we will get you an answer on the synthetic that is pulled up every year and reapplied, even if this new material is not purchased.
All right. So we got some good questions here, and I'm guessing that everyone's just thinking about sites that you've been to, applications that you have. You're just bursting with questions. So we're going to keep moving this forward. So keep putting questions in the chat, or again, raise your hand if you have a question and if you want to ask it out loud. And we're going to move on to the next part of this presentation. Tony, where I think you're going to cover just a little bit of some of the other discussion topics that we might have or other practices.
Yeah, right. So spent a lot of some time here on mulch, and we know there's a variety of other practices, including nutrient management and cover crops, that could be utilized in these urban scenarios and have great applicability to those. A little bit of those challenges are, you know, the size of those and how they fit into some of the payment scenarios. You know, we see some things in there related to, you know, small farm versus urban, especially on the 590, you know, related to 50 acres or less than 0.25 acres for urban based on the 1,000 square feet. So just kind of need to make sure we're paying attention and thinking about those. One thing that we've had some discussions on, and I think I saw Adam on earlier, I think we have come to the conclusion that the 590 urban cap may be an error, and we're trying to confirm that now, and if so, that'll be removed, and we'll let you know if that comes to fruition. Do you want to comment on that, Adam? Or am I jumping the gun on that? I didn't tell him I was going to ask him. Maybe he left. Might be good timing for him. Anyways, we did have some discussions earlier today, and we do think that might have been an error, and we're trying to discern that, and we'll make that known and let you know. So part of it is we think that some of these scenarios are relatively straightforward. We hope they are. Just need to pay attention to some of those little nuances, particularly on the nutrient management, making sure that it's in the 1,000 square feet. As we've talked about, if we're doing this planning already in the 1,000 square feet, hopefully it helps with that. So we are working on some other guidance, kind of like we have with the mulching, some other examples. And we'll get those out related to cover crop and nutrient management as well. I think that's all I had. If someone else has anything to add or any other questions.
So Tony, the one thing I would add is that I feel like we've done a lot of the heavy lifting with the mulching. we've run into every roadblock as we are working on this. And so hopefully as we start to apply the things that we've learned in developing the mulching guidance document, that the cover crop document, which is in draft, and the nutrient management that we're working on, that hopefully the rest of these get a little bit easier because there's certain things that are going to remain the same from these practices on these urban and small farm settings. And so hopefully pulling these guidance documents together will get simplified.
Yeah, good point. Thanks. Yep.
Yeah, and one of the things that Shannon's going to share now, I will stop sharing my screen, but when we were talking about, how to determine sizes or looking at those planning maps and working with your farmers, one of the things that we kind of that was really quickly developed was just a spreadsheet that we could use possibly for using a calculator tool to look at the sizes of mulching areas, or putting in your square feet and quickly converting it to the units that you need. So Shannon, the screen is yours to share.
And if you're attempting to do so, we aren't seeing anything yet.
Oops, sorry. Stephanie, if you'd share your screen, my bad, I was on mute. Stephanie, if you'd share your screen back, I'm just going to talk to that screenshot real quick.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I thought you were going to.
I thought you were going to run through it. I apologize.
No, just show it. So as we've been talking, there's the variety of practice scenario extents, square feet, 1,000 square feet, acres, numbers. We're putting together a tool that if you can calculate your area of your planning, I don't want to call it planning land, that again, Stephanie said it very, very well. The conservation planning on some of these farms could be done at the square foot level. And then we need to roll that back up into our program scenarios, which can change our planning unit, our planning measurements. And then, as Jennifer's going to go into in a little bit here, how do we then enter that into CD? So, what is expected at each different level of detail as we move through our planning process and into our programs. So we're coming up with some tools for you that if you do a measurement on a square foot basis, how does that translate into the mulch number? How does that translate into nutrient management, 1,000 square feet, so on and so forth. So as you make those measurements out there with the farmer and what they plan to do, put that number in the tool one time, and it can ripple through the various scenarios and calculations. Now we know that there's going to be differences possibly in the mulching standard, because we're talking about walkways and beds versus, if a cover crop, if you're not going to plant those in the walkways, what are we going to do with that? We will get you additional guidance on that, but we do want to try to simplify the next steps of whether it be math and conversions and all this stuff, to give you tools that you can just enter a number once and get a similar answer across the board. So again, we will be getting this in your hands in hopes that it helps and helps translate all the various pieces and parts that are floating around out there. And then again, this could be your documentation. If why did I choose 15 beds to mulch? As we're doing quality assurance in that, well, here's how I got that calculation. You don't have to use a tool like this. You can do it in an assistance note on paper. But again, if it's helpful, we're going to get it to you so you can use it.
It's just another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, Susanna, that's a good point. And again, that's where we're really trying hard to incorporate all of our documents and guidance items in a single location. You've noticed that we've started putting a lot of our Excel-based tools and embedding like the document that Kevin showed, so that it's all in one spot. If you can at least find that, you've got access to everything, versus attachment A through M. We understand that. So we're trying really hard to bring all those items together into a single location. And again, trying to find that consistent location of where we store these things as well, so you can find them. That's always the key, for sure. Just a couple things too, as we are getting some good questions here. I did put a poll in the chat. If you would click on that link, that'll open up a website that you can complete the poll. And I saw Jared's follow-up question. Jared, I am going to add another question to that poll. So again, by the end of the conversation here, we can just get an idea of how many of you are faced with assessing and ranking and contracting EQIP applications on the urban setting. It's just for information, keep it a little fun as well. So even if you don't have any, we would appreciate you just saying, hey, I have 0 right now, but I'm just interested in learning what my counterparts across the state are dealing with right now. So any comments or questions on the tool? Or Tony, did I miss? It seems like a lot of questions. Do we want to kind of pause here for a minute and make sure we answer them all?
I think you've kind of hit on them a little bit as far as some of the concerns about the tools. I would just say that if you have other suggestions, positive suggestions on where best we should post these tools, please make that known as well. Might be another thought that something we haven't thought of.
All right. Well, then I think we should probably move on to the next part of the presentation, which will be Jennifer Chen, and she's going to talk about CD guidance. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I just wanted to share a little bit of information with regards to kind of navigating through the business tools with supporting conservation planning efforts in these smaller urban areas. And, you know, I'll kind of reiterate the same message that a number of the other speakers have already mentioned, and that is, you know, flexibility is key. So there are options available as we talk through how to reflect that information in our business tools. I will also say that I just put a few slides together to kind of organize my thoughts, but the information in these slides is all reflected in the guidance document that Kevin had been walking through. So all the same information is going to be reflected there. And once that information is released, you'd have all the same information as well. So just a heads up that that's where this information is also located. Also, as just a general reference, as I talk through kind of some options for reflecting this information in Conservation Desktop, I talk through utilizing some of the functionality of the tools. I'm not going to go into detail on that, on the mechanics of doing that here in this presentation, but the details on, you know, which buttons to click and which steps to go through are all outlined in pretty good detail in our lesson plans. So I've included a link to the lesson plan here in this slide just as a reference. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Stephanie, can you go to the next slide, please?
Oh, Stephanie, next slide, please.
All right, I'm going to take over control and I will walk through the slides here. Apologize. Oh, I think we lost Stephanie briefly.
Yeah,
Sure
looks like
she'll
she
come
had
back.
to leave. She had a bad connection. So improvisation, awesome.
Sorry, folks. Give me just a minute.
Jennifer, I have it.
Alrighty.
Okay, you got it. Good.
I
good,
have
good.
it. Yep, just needed a second here. All right.
Yeah.
And organize my windows.
Yep.
All right, moving right along. So kind of the first step when we talk about putting information into our business tools is working through Conservation Desktop to identify the land that we're working on. And, you know, typically the process is that, you know, we start with what FSA or the Farm Service Agency has put into the system with regards to the land and the designation of those land units. And we usually refer to the CLU or the common land unit as a kind of a starting point for where that land is. So I just want to kind of point out something that's kind of, you know, it's available as an option for any conservation planning effort, but might be really applicable here when we're talking about some of these small scale urban farms where the CLU boundary does not necessarily align with how the land is being managed out there. So even though we typically start with the CLU as our basis, we have that flexibility as planners to designate a PLU or a planned land unit. So that's really kind of one of the big reasons why we have a separate land unit layer in our system, as opposed to just bringing in the CLU and working with the same common layer as FSA. This gives us that flexibility to define the PLU or PLUs, planned land units, to accurately reflect how the land is being managed. So in this example, you can see the top picture reflects what the initial CLU was as drawn by FSA. And you can see there's a bit of an arbitrary line there, field 2, field 3. We have that ability to revise those lines once we bring those into Conservation Desktop and identify them as PLUs. So just wanted to make sure folks are aware that this is a flexibility that you can utilize when you're starting out your planning efforts. So in this example, looking at the picture to the bottom right here, you can see that I dissolved this line, and then I also, this is a fenced in area that defines this urban farm, and our original PLU, or excuse me, the original CLU incorporated that area. Well, it's, there's vehicles parked there. So we just kind of revised that line a little bit just to reflect, again, a little bit more accurate reflection of what the land looks like. And then you can also see that going through the process and providing in the attributes for the PLU, we've identified, of course, the tract and field number as we would normally, the land use, and then we've also identified this urban land use modifier. So if you remember in our planning guidance, not only do we have land use designations, but we also have land use modifiers. And in this case, we want to identify this land as having that urban modifier to help further describe how the land is being used. All right, so moving along from land units, the next thing we typically are doing, or one of the follow-up things that we're typically doing as we're putting information into our business tools, is we're defining practice extents and identifying which practices are going to be planned and what the schedule is for when those practices are going to be implemented. So this is where I want to stress again where we've got some options. And we talked at length about this as a group because there are so many different types of operations that you guys might be working with various scales. And so we want to provide you kind of that flexibility to be able to represent the practice extents within Conservation Desktop, identify some additional details with regards to those practices on your conservation plan maps and things like that, but then also understand that the full conservation plan and direction that will be provided to the customer not only includes the plan and the map, but also it includes implementation requirements or the site-specific details of how that particular customer or client is going to implement those practices. So kind of coming back to this slide here, because we know that we have some limitations with the zoom scales of our Conservation Desktop products, we realize we're working in some pretty small areas that might be difficult to represent. Not only do we have some of those limitations, but drawing around a lot of these tiny, teeny areas can take quite a long time. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that you understand that we've got some flexibility with how this information can be reflected. So, which option you choose really depends on you and the client you're working with. Bottom line is, as Shannon had mentioned, is that conservation planning process and having that communication with the client to make sure they understand what they need to do based on the conversations that the two of you have had together. So, which option is best for your operator, you decide that based on the information that you need to convey. But in this example or examples, we've provided a couple options or alternatives to the same scenario. So in this situation, we've got that same farm that we looked at on the previous slide, and they're going to do the mulching practice. And you heard Kevin talk through really well about, identifying how in the urban settings, they've identified kind of a standard size for mulching. And each of those standard size would be considered one unit or one number. And the reason for that, as he was mentioning, is that the small scale payment scenario is based on number or number of instances. So in these two pictures, these are two different ways to represent the same information. We've got that 1.6 acre field, and we've worked with the client, and they're planning to do mulch a series of beds and areas this spring, let's say, and based on that standard unit that Kevin reviewed, this equates to 20 units worth of mulching to be applied or implemented. And so when we talk about scheduling that in Conservation Desktop, we've got a couple options. We've got the option to essentially create a whole field practice or full extent practice, which you can see here, this mulching symbol covers the entire footprint of the PLU. Or if it makes more sense based on the operation, you can do some limited amount of kind of redefining which specific areas are going to be receiving mulching. And notice in both, we're talking about 20 units of mulch that are planned in this application, in this plan, but they're represented two different ways. Again, one with the full extent practice and one with kind of identifying 3 of these main working areas. And then note down here in the lower right, even each of these areas has multiple units of mulching that are going to be planned. But because of the way we've drawn it over on the right, obviously the numbers are a little bit different. So based on conversations with the customer and what their needs are and what the plan is in order to adequately treat the resource concerns that have been identified, 20 is the number. And so whether it's 20 units worth scheduled or implemented in this larger area, or whether it's 8 units implemented here, 6 units implemented here, and 6 units implemented here, both of these are viable options.
So Jennifer, a question from Jamie. So it's not going to be a red flag during QAR when mulching is scheduled over a permanent building if scheduling a full extent practice.
So thank you, Tony, for that. I can't see the chat since I'm sharing my slides now. And I'm laughing because Jamie and I, we think pretty similarly sometimes, and I consider that to put myself in some pretty good company. But Jamie, that was the first question I asked. So short answer to your question is no. In these situations where we're identifying this general extent on what we typically refer to as a conservation plan map. When we're talking about these small scale areas, these are almost really serving more as a location map. So that's why, I thank you for asking that question that way, because again, that was exactly where my mind went when we first started having these conversations. But this really underlines how important it is that in addition to having a map like this and the conservation plan and the 1155 that shows, 20 units, so on and so forth, you are also as planners providing the implementation requirements. And those implementation requirements are going to be more specific to identify where those areas are that are going to be mulched. And so if you remember some of the visuals that Kevin was scrolling through when he was going through the guidance document, where he really honed in on areas of 2,600 feet or 300 feet, so on and so forth, that really identified where that practice is actually going to occur. And in a lot of those situations, that level of detail utilizes a tool other than Conservation Desktop, where you might pull in Google Maps or things like that to really be able to zoom in and show that fine scale planning within the IR, the implementation requirement.
All right, another question. So we do not have to use FSA field numbers if we go this route, as long as the 1155 matches the map, correct?
Correct. I'll keep that one short and sweet. Thanks, Tony.
All right, on to another one. How did you do the calculations on each of these and still end up with the same number?
So these are 2 ways to reflect the same information. So working out on the farm and talking with the owner of this land and how they manage the ground, and again, the resource concerns that have been identified and how they utilize with their crop rotation, et cetera, 20 was the number. 20 units worth of mulch, which I believe was 4 feet by 75 feet, if my memory serves, Kevin. But anyway, that extent of ground was what was identified as needing to be mulched. So my pictures are really just showing 2 ways to represent that same information on the plan map.
And then you're just manually changing the quantity, right?
So yes, so that gets me, yeah, that I think I got one more slide that'll kind of talk through where I think they're headed with that. But the one thing I want to point out before we move on to the last slide is, the last slide in my section anyway, is just to point out my bullet point here is to use annotations to provide details. And if you remember, we've got a couple ways of putting information on a plan map. We've got labels and we've got annotations. This over here would be a label that's applied for the practice schedule PLU, but this is basically a manual data entry using annotation layers. And again, the idea here is that this is information that's not saved anywhere in CD. We don't have that data attribute populated at this point. So utilizing annotations gives you a lot of flexibility for typing and putting information on the map that you can't get otherwise. And I'll say within our lesson plans, I believe lesson plan 11.8, or excuse me, I forget what the lesson plan number is offhand, sorry. But there is a lesson plan on labels and annotation that provides a whole lot of detail on this in terms of the mechanics of how to do it.
And one other question, maybe you've kind of answered already, I'm not sure. I've been trying to read through the questions. Is there a way to have consistent tracking of any planning/mapping docs that are done outside of CD, for example, in Google Earth? Or are those plans/maps eventually added into CD as additional notes?
I'll try to answer that question, although if I don't get at the specifics of what the person asking was getting at, please let me know. But I mentioned Google Maps in regards to being able to show more detailed information as part of the implementation requirement. And whether you copy Google Maps and paste a snippet of Google Maps into the implementation requirement, or hand draw in a map if that's acceptable, that information is going to be part of the implementation requirement, and that implementation requirement should be part of the case file. So it wouldn't be within CD, wouldn't be within the CD map per se, but it would be in the electronic case file.
Hey, Jennifer.
Yes. Hi, welcome back.
I know, I'm back. My whole network like totally crashed. If it was going to happen, it was going to happen today at 1:30 in the afternoon. So I think to add on to that, because I think that was a really good point. I think about using Google Maps or other things like that in that planning process as well, when we're out with the farmers, kind of if we're looking at beds or doing measurements, Google Maps might come in good, or Google Earth might come in really handy during those times as well, which again would just be a map that might be a planning map that would be part of the case file as well. So I think that those outside of CD mapping options are really great planning tools to help support the things that we put in CD, and then also to help support the implementation requirements that support putting the practice on the landscape.
Good points. So before I kind of close out on my section and turn it back over to Stephanie, I just kind of wanted to sum up, kind of finish through the process. So we talked through, creating land units, creating practices, and what those extents could look like, and how additional information can be communicated on the map using annotation. I want you to kind of remember what option A looks like versus option B. And the reason I say that is because the kind of the next step that we go into when we're going through the business tools, of course, you've got the ProTrax application, and you've got CART and the ranking and all that good stuff that goes on. But when it comes time to actually creating agreement items for these things, whether you go with option A or option B gives you some different flexibility with creating agreement items. And what I mean by that is option A essentially equates to one practice instance, aka one agreement item, so one CIN within the application. The bottom right reflects 3 instances of mulching being scheduled on this PLU, which would then equate to 3 agreement items or CINs being submitted into the ProTrax application. And so then when we get to that point, and we are submitting that and developing the agreement items and submitting those to ProTrax, it's going to look a little bit different, right? So again, if it were option A, we'd have just this one agreement item that would contain all 20 units of mulching that we've identified. And if we go down to option B, we've got three, and I just showed the first two here just for visual purposes, but we'd have 3 contract item numbers, one reflecting the 8 instances, another reflecting the 6 instances, and then the last one also reflecting 6 instances. So the difference between these is, you know, if that client or producer doesn't get them all done at once, you have a little bit more flexibility here to pay on some of these instances and not all at the same time. Another point that I'll make, and I didn't put a screen capture of this in, is just kind of reminding folks of the difference of the units. And I'm going to go back here a minute. As was mentioned already as part of this call, and as is the case with a number of our practices, we've got 1 unit of measure for the practice, but then we have 1 or more units of measure for all the payment scenarios. In the example of mulch, the practice unit of measure is acres, and that just corresponds with the mulching standard. But as was mentioned already, there's multiple payment scenarios, including these smaller scale or high tunnel type scenarios where the unit of measure is NO or number of instances, which again goes back to why Kevin talked about kind of that standard size as being assumed for each unit of number, but also carries forward when we talk about going through Conservation Desktop, where we schedule the practice as a practice polygon with that acreage amount. But then when we go to creating agreement items, we would define the number of instances associated with that item, with that agreement number, right? Because it's going to show a 0 value and create edit agreement items, and it's going to have a little caution sign, and it's going to prompt the user to enter that value in. And if you're going with an option A, you're going to input all 20 or the number 20 in that area. Whereas if you're going to be doing multiple defined practice areas, you would identify the corresponding number of instances that go along with each of those areas. So again, what is better? Which option is better, option A or option B? It really is up to you as the planner to determine what best communicates what the client is intending to do. And then also, you know, going back to having a little bit more flexibility down here to be able to certify some of the mulching instances before all of them are done. So that's something that you as a planner need to decide what works best for you and your client. All right, so I believe that's it for my section. I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic back over to Stephanie. Are you prepared to take back over the screen share, Stephanie?
Yes, everything is up and running, so I can share the screen again. And Kevin, I see that you have your hand raised, so we'll get to you in just a second. I want to say thanks to Jennifer. We originally had her part of the presentation before Kevin's part of the presentation, but I knew that when it comes to the intricacy of working in business tools, that she was going to get the most questions. And so I thought it would be good to go through the examples first and then bring her business tools in to kind of bring it on home to all of you, because I'm sure that's where you are all working right now, is in business tools, in CD, all the time working on that. So I knew she was going to get the most questions. So thanks, Jennifer, for helping us out today. That's been it's been really great.
You're welcome.
All right, Kevin, I saw you had your hand raised. Let's hear it. What do you got thinking? What do you got going on?
Yeah, I actually had a question for Jennifer. Speaking of that, on that document, Jennifer showed there was square foot plan, or there was number planned, and then above that there was like one. So there was a mulching scenario, and then under that there was like 1A high tunnel. And so under mulch, like alongside the mulching scenario, it said 1.6 acres. Yeah, there you go, like 1.6 acres, and then below that was 20 numbers. Can you tell us like where that how that 1.6 acres was achieved, or if it's just like an example?
Sure.
I'll move back one more slide, Jennifer. How does that sound?
Where you are is great.
Oh.
Okay, that works too. Either way, so this actually goes to the kind of the point of the difference between the practice standard and the payment scenarios. So the practice standard for mulching is measured in acres. So that first number there right above where I've got the yellow highlights reflects the extent of that practice as scheduled in CD. The highlighted portion, the number, the NOs, reflects the payment scenario unit. So that's why both are reflected, because of this difference between the practice standard unit and the payment scenario unit.
Got it. Thank you. So that 1.6 acres is the practice, or the extent, the planning area extent.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
If I could just make a real quick statement too, again, just as a reminder, we want you to be as detailed as possible at the conservation planning level. That's where the farmer knows where they're growing things and everything else. We need you to be accurate there. We're giving options in of how to convert those conservation planning decisions into conservation desktop. Again, as Jennifer mentioned, there are some limitations on this type of scale when it comes to conservation desktop. We're not asking you to, if you are a lumper by nature, we're not forcing you to be a splitter. But if you are a splitter, then we're enabling that as well. So we're giving you these flexibilities so that you can navigate the next level of business tools with the ultimate goal of getting the good conservation on the ground. We don't want CD and plan maps and these sorts of things being your barrier. We want you to focus on that conservation on the ground. So hopefully these flexibilities will work well with whichever you are, a lumper or a splitter, and we'll get these things moving forward for you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shannon. So to continue on kind of with the discussion today, the examples we walk through, the guidance document that's developed, that's just one part of the needs that you have as conservation planners here. Jennifer mentioned, the implementation requirements. I'm sure we kind of mentioned them earlier on in the presentation as well, but that's one of the next most important things that you would need, because the implementation requirements will detail the site-specific application of that practice on the landscape. So that's actually being developed right now. I took about 2 or 3 different mulching documents from some other states and am fine-tuning that to make it be an urban and small farm mulching document. So it's really going to focus on that first page of the mulching or the IR to actually have that site specific map zoomed in pretty close to the operation, so that when it comes time for that farmer to do that practice, hopefully the first and second page of that mulching IR will detail where things are happening and how much is going out there, and just really hit on the actual implementation of that practice. The other thing is too is, we've been talking about this guidance document today, but we haven't shared this with you. So as we've gone through the discussion today, I've even thought of a few things that after having this discussion and sharing this with the group and seeing some comments, that we need to go back and make a few edits on this before we release this, which will be happening really soon. I can't remember if Shannon had set a date at the beginning of the meeting or not, but I'm sure we'll discuss that towards the end of the presentation here today. And then again, the continued development of other documents that we have that are getting worked on right now, cover crops, nutrient management. I threw crop rotation in there, but so on and so forth. The list doesn't really end as we start to think about the applicability of our conservation practices on urban and small farms. It's just fine-tuning the information that we collect when we're out there on our planning site visit, and also fine-tuning the information that we give back to the farmer so that they can successfully implement that practice on the scale that they farm. Which ultimately, when all these guidance documents come together, we will call our urban planning toolkit, our urban ag planning toolkit. So those are some of the things that we have left to deliver to you. The next thing that we're going to go to is through the end of the guidance document, Kevin took some time to pull together a lot of pictures that were in his that he has worked with across the state, and he's going to kind of show some different mulching things, and we're going to kind of hit on some thoughts that we want to think about on these practices, or on the application of this practice on the landscape. So that'll be the next part of this discussion. And but before we do that, because once I close out of this PowerPoint, I'm not coming back to it. I just want to just say in closing, right? If you need support, continue to contact us. We're pulling this thing and we're all kind of learning on this together because we really want to take what we're doing and the great way that we're planning with farmers and not have that get lost as we're trying to, you know, trying to make a conservation plan or a conservation contract. We've all heard that concern and we all know this experience that it takes as much time or more time to work with a farmer often that has an urban or a small farm than it does with a grower who has 1,000 acres and just wants to do cover crops or no-till or those conservation practices. So again, we know that the level of detail is so great, and we want to maintain that important relationship we have with those with our urban growers. So we're going to continue to learn and grow together. And so with all of that, I just want to say thanks for your time today and thank you so much for all the questions that you had. But again, we're not done. I'm just closing out this silly PowerPoint so we don't have to look at it anymore. And then I'm gonna pull up the mulching document. And while I'm pulling that up, if there's any questions or anything in the chat that we need to discuss, we can do that.
So, yeah, there's a question, kind of a comment in here from Jennifer. Is there a possible timeline for the remaining items / documents? This discussion today was good, but for my planning efforts for FY22, I won't be able to utilize it. Just curious if it'll be late summer for planning FY23, especially for those current urban ag apps that may not get funded this year. I guess what I'm saying is that it makes me realize just how much I don't know in this urban ag realm.
I feel you, Jennifer. I know how you feel. Jared has his hand raised. Jared, are you wanting to comment to this question or add to this the concern that Jennifer has brought forth?
Not necessarily answer the question, just kind of a comment on generally everything we're discussing today.
All right.
Go ahead. All right, go ahead, Jared.
Okay. And Jennifer, I do understand what you're saying. And Lee, I just wanted to jump in here just from a DC perspective. I really appreciated this group trying to bring some concrete clarity to some of these, I'm going to call them new things in the user guide. And I thought I would just throw in my 2 cents. I think one of the things that's important to note, especially maybe for new district conservationists or folks, our planners that are out there for cover crops, for example, look close at the user guide. That's changed quite a bit for the small farms. I know it's not something that was necessarily highlighted a whole lot early on, and then this mulching component with the EQIP user guide. If you're like me, up until this point, many times when we were working with an urban type farm, the way that the payments worked out, it just wasn't really worth it for folks to step into EQIP for things like cover crops. And then before this year, mulching wasn't actually an option in there for this kind of scenario. It was really only in there for, I think, establishing vegetation or something like that. So I guess I just encourage you guys to start looking, look at that a little closer as you're starting to work with urban farms and realize it is more of an option. I think more of a possibility where we can help folks financially better than we have in the past. So just thought I'd throw that out there. Just because if you aren't in the habit of going to look for those things as an option, historically, that's not been really something I've utilized, and now I'm trying to figure out how to make it work on some of these farms now. And I think that's all. Thanks.
Anyone else have anything to add or any other questions?
Hey, Tony.
Oh.
Yeah, to several of the comments about when will this guidance be issued, that sort of thing. Yeah, let's just all self-admit we don't mean to be reactionary this year, but we're to that point almost. That's why we wanted to share this with you, see if there's anything that really rocked your world of how you were moving forward with your EQIP urban applications, give you our comfort level that we are kind of being, we understand at this scale, our business tools may not be the most pertinent way to do planning as compared to like on a larger farm. So what we're trying to do is say, hey, we're giving you comfort to navigate our business tools to the best of your ability. And also make sure that we don't short a farmer on, like say, the mulch scenario or some of these other scenarios, that we're giving you comfort to move forward with your planning process the way we can. We know there are QA, QR type activities are going to come into place, and that you may get questions. That's why this information is going to be put out there so we have a consistent interpretation and don't make you have to redo things for the sake of just redoing it because we don't have a consistent message. What I'm trying to say is we realize it's getting late. If you need this information, we're happy to share it to you in its current form. But that's why we're sharing it with you in this format. But if you have specific questions, I guess I'm saying please reach out to Stephanie, to Tony, to myself, to anybody, and we will get you an answer to move you forward. And again, if you're afraid of that next level of review, we will give everyone that consistent comfort level to say this is within EQIP policy. We're moving forward accordingly. Okay, so I'm kind of offering that if you are struggling with an EQIP urban application, please reach out. We will make sure to help you on that specific case, and get this information to you as best we can. As far as next year, yeah, there's going to be a whole lot more next year. Again, we're going to bring Kevin and Ellie and her team and everybody together to make sure we have the technical knowledge, and then how to take that technical conservation planning knowledge into our programs and navigate these in an even more efficient way.
This first lift, this is heavy, and it's taken us multiple discussions and reiterations and of what we're trying to provide, and realizing we're not trying to be reactionary. I think we are hopeful that some of this is going to come out and it might be able to assist you here in the very near future, and some may not, but hopefully this has been of assist.
All right, so it's about 2:29 right now. I think to keep us moving on, finishing this up, I think Shannon, you had us here till 3 o'clock, right? Not that we're going to use the whole time, but yes, Shannon.
Oh yeah, this is for the benefit of you planners who are currently navigating these things. So yeah, we're here to learn together, and use your time as efficiently as we can.
So for that, I think what we'll do is hopefully my screen is still sharing. I did have to surprisingly leave again from this meeting because of my network crashing. Who would have thought I would have such terrible internet in Brownsburg of all places? But I guess today is the day it's going to happen.
Yes, we can see your screen. Okay.
Wonderful. So so we're going to scroll through the last, I think it's probably 2 pages or so of pictures. And if Kevin's able to contribute and kind of talk about each of these pictures, or maybe Jared or even Ellie as well, but I'm guessing that most of these you guys are probably intimately familiar with because you are on site where these practices were applied. And you could maybe talk about them a little bit. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to show some pictures of like examples of natural mulching, or natural mulching using natural materials, and then the other scenario, which would be mulching using synthetic materials. So very, kind of basic pictures, but it's just straw mulch and strawberries. That's a decently common one. Straw mulch in a high tunnel on the right. You can see that maybe 2/3 of that high tunnel is mulched. So hopefully, when thinking through how many mulch units to schedule, the grower would have an idea that, just they're only going to be planting 3 rows of tomatoes, and those are the one, or 3 beds of tomatoes, and those are the ones that get mulched. And then maybe they don't like to mulch their peppers on the right, so they hopefully they would know that in advance, or at least have a, I think that's the important part of just upfront working with the grower and trying to plan those mulching units or mulching square foot as much as you can. Can you go ahead and scroll down, Stephanie, please?
Yep.
There's just some more straw. There's, left on the left, it's covering, you can see 30-inch wide garden beds and their associated walkways. That whole area was mulched. Same thing on the right. I don't see that super common where like a whole field like that is our whole big plot is mulched. It usually is kind of like maybe a few beds together, but in this case there is a lot of mulch going down. Go ahead.
In these pictures here, Kevin, too, these would be really nice examples of raised beds, but not framed beds, correct? Yeah.
Yep. And so you'll hear growers calling these permanent raised beds. And I know sometimes you think permanent and sometimes I want to think like wood sides, but really a lot of the growers use the term permanent raised bed for just an earthen raised bed like this. And maybe a constructed raised bed might be a good term to use for something with like wooden sides. But I think both of these pictures here are about 30-inch wide beds with like probably 18-inch walkways. So a bed would be, for example, the one with the corn, the 2 rows of corn. That's 2 rows of corn planted on one bed, which is 30 inches wide, and then it's got the walkways on each side.
Thank you.
I think there's another picture of straw being pressed down earlier in the document. But like this is 5 inches of freshly laid straw on the left. If you press that down, you might get around 2 inches, maybe a little bit less. It seems like in the trials that we did, it seemed like 6 inches was about that target for getting it to be 2 inches deep. And then just like we did have a list of common mulches above. But it doesn't mean that we're excluding other kinds. So, for example, especially in the urban environment, you'll see folks getting creative. There's paper, like a row of newsprint paper. You'll see some folks using cardboard, and then like mulch on top. So there are different like materials that can be used. Just help the grower think through those. And I'm sure Jennifer Chen uses newspaper. Yeah, me too. Just work with the grower and make sure you note down what materials are planning to be used. Make sure it fits the standard and spec, and hopefully good for their operation. Okay, go ahead.
And that picture on the right is a great example of, again, multiple types of natural material, but natural material nonetheless being layered on top of each other.
Okay, couple instances of using shredded leaves. That's garlic and Jared Chu on the left. That's just shredded leaves. And it's hard to so some people use whole leaves, some people use shredded leaves, some people use leaves that have been in a pile for. So there are different levels of decomposition and different applications for each of those, but in general, this leaf debris is going on top of the beds to serve as mulch. So you can see the garlic on the left and the lettuce on the right. Go ahead. There's also, forgive me for forgetting the number of the wildlife planting standard, but one of the new wildlife plantings for native plugs is also conducive to mulch. So you could pair those practices. So on the left, you can see a leaf mulch that's being used in a native planting. So it's mulch 2 inches deep. I actually think there's 3 sheets of paper underneath that as well. And then those plugs will be planted into it. Thank you, Brian. So 420, small scenario for wildlife planting. Thank you. Straw can also be used, if it's a cover crop that they're that they're terminating, and then planting into, that's not necessarily like that's a cover crop, right? It's not mulch, although it does create a mulch. But in some instances, there will be a cover crop, and then the person will also want to mulch after that cover crop. So in this instance, the picture just shows a terminated cover crop with straw on top of it to achieve that 2-inch depth. And there's different kinds of processes that you'll see folks using. Some, I think we all push towards soil health, but you might see that cover crop tilled in and then the bed mulched. I could imagine seeing a cover crop tilled in and then synthetic mulch put over the bed. So, and then maybe natural mulch in the walkways, because we want to make sure those walkways are mulched too. So you'll see I think there's a lot of different scenarios or different techniques or crop sequences that could be utilized under mulching.
Kevin, did you see that question or comment from Susanna?
Yeah. How many years out do you normally see detailed planning?
Did you already answer that?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a good question. How many years do you normally see detailed planning and effective scheduling? I feel like there's some level of adapting on the fly with small scale operations. So scheduling multiple years of mulching and rotation could be challenging to manage a contract, especially when we tie them to a specific location. So a farmer that's on top of it might have 3 years out planned. That's not common though. It's not. It's usually that next crop year is planned. Sometimes it's that winter that it is getting planned. Hopefully before that, right? But sometimes it is that winter. Sometimes there's crop failures and things move. So a crop plan needs to be adjusted. So yeah, it is challenging. I would think it would be challenging to try to schedule, to think exactly in what location this mulch is, within this small farm, within this like 1 acre plot, like farm, like exactly where those mulches are going to be 3 years out. Like it's kind of hard to determine. And I think that's why it is kind of helpful to be able to think through, okay, how much, maybe not exact location within the practice extent, but within this practice extent, the grower does know that they're going to be planting, so many rows of tomatoes, and those tomatoes are getting mulched. So there is some information that would help you determine what that number could look like 3 years from now. But you're right in the sense that like exact location might be difficult.
If I can add to that, Kevin, again, our goal on these is to get the farmer to make a change, right? I mean, currently they're controlling weeds or managing their crop with other methods. And so we're trying to say, okay, can you commit to 20 beds worth of mulch every year? And we don't have to pinpoint where those are right now in year 1, but we're committing to controlling our weeds through this process for the next 3 years. It's in someplace on the farm. We're giving you that flexibility within CD to not have to pinpoint every square foot of where that's going to be each year. But against the farmer's commitment to trying this practice in hopes that it pays off for them, that they'll continue even after the EQIP contract is over. Okay, so just keep that concept in mind when we're doing our conservation planning. And again, a lot of comments that, hey, we've already made those conservation planning discussions and decisions. We didn't talk about this practice. That's great. Again, but if you have and you scheduled this, now we're just trying to help you give that flexibility where it goes and how to make it happen.
Okay, yeah, another question from Brianne, or I guess statement from Brianne, is that for the wildlife planting 420, just realize that in the job information sheet or standard, it does say that mulching with permanent weed barriers like landscape fabric or other long-lasting material that blocks access to ground and critical ground nesting habitat will not be used. So synthetic mulch would not be scheduled in a 420. Paired with 420, it would be more of a natural mulch. Thank you, Brianne. Yep, go ahead.
I was going to say, looking at Jennifer's question too, are the IRs intended to be used in FY22? For the mulching practice that we have in urban and small farms, ideally the answer to that question would be yes, that we're working to get those IRs out there as planners are looking to obligate those contracts and develop those once planning decisions or funding decisions are made, so that planners have those tools at their discretion.
Just a reminder, you as planners won't need the IR in particular until after a funding decision is made. And so I'm looking at the poll right now. I see that we only have 2 applications that even have mulch to be considered. So again, if those receive a contract, again, Jared, I think you mentioned in chat you have 2. That might be your answer. That simplifies Stephanie's job in getting you the IR versus the entire state. So, but again, this is this year. Next year we'll definitely have a larger toolbox, as Stephanie has alluded to give you all that good information.
I think I said toolkit, but they're almost the same, aren't they? A toolkit, toolbox. Well, now that toolkit's no longer used in our business tools, I figure I'm going to try to claim that word and repurpose it.
You can have
Perfect.
it.
All right, Kevin, we'll keep, so I think as we roll down these through these pictures, I think this is allowing people time to think about stuff and ask more questions. So we can continue to go through pictures and then look at the comments as people are asking questions. All right, and looks like Jason has one right here. At what point do we consider the resource concern addressed with mulching? If the practice lifespan is 1 year and we can do it for up to 3 years, when do they need to decide to, then they need to decide to continue, correct? Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
I was going to say, I think the answer to that question is yes, we would hope that they continue with that practice as well. Much like many of our conservation practices that have 1 year lifespans, the goal in those first 3 years where we're providing that incentive payment or that practice payment, our goal is to support them as much as possible so that they can have success implementing that practice and see the benefits of having that conservation practice out there on the landscape. And as with any of those practices that they can schedule for up to 3 years with that 1 year lifespan, at the end of those 3 years, they may decide not to do it anymore. And we really hope that that isn't the case. And we've also seen that in many times that it isn't, that, how do I say this right? That they do continue on with those practices, whether we're thinking about cover crops or no-till. And I think mulching it falls into that same spectrum of practices on urban lands, that we're trying to support that farmer as they figure out the way that they want to and need to use mulching on that landscape. Please add on, Shannon, if I missed anything there, because I feel like I got my yeses and my nos mixed up there, or my positive and my negatives mixed up in that statement.
No, yeah, I think you said it perfectly, Stephanie. Again, we're trying to help farmers make a change, and helping. That's what our funding is here to do, to help them overcome those initial costs and those risks of trying something new. But again, the success of our programs relies on quality technical assistance, and that's kind of why we focus on plant pest pressure, and that way we could do a detailed specification to say, hey, we need at least 2 inches of coverage of straw mulch and these other materials, and hoping that will show the farmer that, hey, this is a good thing, even though it costs money annually, it's something I'm going to continue on as a part of my business decision. And then again, the side benefits of moisture management and other things that mulch can do as well. Hopefully the farmers will continue on after our EQIP contract is over. And keep in mind too, if this is new to you, if you haven't talked to your clients about, say, mulch as an option, this is the next step that we're going to help everyone understand the system of practices that can work. So kind of what we're talking here is, can we minimize tillage for weed control by using mulch? And then of course we have the winter months where we can maybe get a cover crop growing to further reduce weed pressures as well as build soil health. And again, we know that a lot of these farmers have to use some level of soil disturbance. So how do we use mulch to minimize the soil disturbance tillage, let's call it, and those cover crops and rebuilding that soil structure that might have been degraded by the disturbance. So again, these can work in a system. And again, that cover crop creates a more natural mulch as well. So how do we start helping get our farmers excited about all of these different options to improve the soil on their farm and the production and everything else that comes along with it as secondary benefits? Good questions. Very good questions. Appreciate these. So I'm going to keep reading Jason's questions. It really good. Just was wanting to see if there was an end to our assistance with mulching, like there is with other one-year practices we hope they adopt. Yeah. Again, it's a trial period. Our goal is that this becomes just part of normal farm business. Again, there's never going to be enough farm bill money to pay farmers to do what we think they should do. So we have to give them these trial efforts and hope that they see the light, that they'll continue these on their own without our financial assistance.
All right, Kevin, so should we keep going through some of these pictures? I think this is we've been sitting on this picture for a little while. So hopefully everyone's had time to look at it. I don't know if you have any comments you want to make on it before we scroll on down to the next page.
I don't think so. I think it's yeah, just diverse mulch, and then the transplant hull is created and planted into.
And that looks like a pretty deep hole of mulch.
Yes. Yep. That's probably at least 2 inches, right? I think there's crimson clover that's chopped down, and there's probably newspaper over that, and then and looks like some alfalfa hay in this context. Yep. Okay. I don't have as much personal experience with like synthetic mulches, but there is a scenario for plastic mulch, right? So this is black plastic. I think it's usually, I can't remember if it's like usually 4 to 6 mil is like the width thickness that folks usually use. But that's it in strawberry production. Can't tell in this picture if the walkways are mulched. But I know that's it's been a part of our discussions, and we they're it doesn't look like they are mulched. So there is a weed resource concern there, and feel free to add to this if you'd like, anybody. But there is a weed concern there, so those walkways should be mulched as well. So whether that be with a natural mulch or extending fabric over it.
I agree with that, Kevin. That's pretty spot on with that, and this tends to be in growing situations where we are using plastic. This tends to be what we see more often than not. All right.
Landscape fabric, that's pretty similar to black plastic. It's just a little bit usually thicker, and there's different thicknesses that you can get. Like the thick stuff, like really thick landscape fabric could almost like block out all light. The lighter duty landscape fabric seems to let a little light in, so you might get some weed growth through that kind of landscape fabric. But yeah, it's a fairly common tool that's used on farms. This actual plot here, these beds, that landscape fabric is laid down, and then the holes are burnt in it at the crop spacing that the farmer wants. And actually, that landscape fabric in particular wouldn't, in this instance, would not be like, they're not moving it for 3 years. They keep that in place. So I think Shannon mentioned that we'll get back to you on clarity on what exactly that means as far as payments and year to year. But yeah, so I think in general we would advise to, yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. But the landscape fabric is a fairly common tool.
To add on to that, Kevin, I use landscape fabric in a lot of my gardening activities. I don't get as much time to manage my weeds, so my cover crops and my intercropping plants are in wide areas between my not necessarily in between my rows per se. So I use that, and if you see those lines that are on there, each one of those lines represents a foot of spacing. And so as you can tell, we have the lettuce on the left, and then I would say that's kale growing in the middle there. We have about a 1 foot walkway right? A 12-inch walkway, maybe a little bit more than that between those beds in this situation here. That's how I would look at that. That fabric is mulching the bed and the walkways, and that walkway, when we get it under a tunnel, whether it's netting or a high tunnel, those walkways tend to be very narrow.
There's a picture of biodegradable mulch. I think we were calling this synthetic, right? We determined that
Yes.
like it was kind of a hard like line there, right? But we determined that for the purposes of just how it fits into the scenarios, we're going to consider biodegradable mulch synthetic.
Because it is still some form of plastic that's going out there. Maybe it will decompose over time, but it's not the same as straw or hay or leaf mulch.
Yep. And, you know, depending on weed pressure like that, the duration of biodegradable mulch, it probably depends on the kind, but I would think that within that season that will start decomposing, and you'll need to deal with weeds in another form, whether that be more biodegradable mulch or more other kinds of mulches to keep the weeds down.
All right.
This was another point of interest, but you'll see the tarps in this picture. These are actually going to be removed before the next crop is planted. So these are tarps that usually silage tarps that are being used to terminate vegetation, whether that be an existing crop or a cover crop. So we, we determined that tarping an area like this for like a temporary amount of time is not going to be considered mulching under these practice scenarios. I guess we could take when we, Tony mentioned that, when we start talking, or maybe it was Jared, but when we start talking about, no-till and reduced till management, it might fall more, under something like that. But as far as a mulch, we're not going to be counting tarping as mulching. Any questions on that?
It's a wonderful practice, but it's not mulching in this circumstance. Here's your last page, Kevin, some of the things that you had pulled together.
Yeah, just like at the bottom of the guidance document, just wanted to give like folks just a table that kind of helps think through what quantity might be needed of mulching to cover a certain area at a certain depth. So you can see like leaf mulch and wood chips, it takes about a third of a yard, 0.31 yards, to cover an inch over 100 square feet. So if we were trying to get to our 2 inches and we were covering 100 square feet, then we would need 0.61 yards. So that's just hopefully a table that can help think through that. And then straw, these are compressed, like the 2 inches is the compressed, like, when you press your hand down on the bed, it's more indicative of that. So a straw, one bale in general covers about 70 to 80 square feet at 2 inches. Hay bales might cover a little bit more. And of course, this is going to depend greatly on the weight of the bale. For example, there's 30-pound bales, 50-pound bales. I think in general, this estimate is for probably a mid-sized bale, which would be about 50 pounds. And when I say mid-sized bale, I mean like a bale with 2 strings on it. That's just about 50 pounds. So just hopefully helpful conversions to help think through planning and helping the grower think through planning. Okay.
All right, I'm going to zoom out here just a little bit so we can get the rest of this table in here a little bit better.
All right, cool. I guess this was a cost table that just kind of helps the planner and grower think through how much something like this might actually cost on the ground, and then comparing that to in the INNRCS payment rate per number. And the asterisk is there just to remember to always refer back to the user guide for the most current the current payment rate number per number, as this is a guidance document, and just make sure you check the user guide to make sure that the numbers are up to date, the ones that you're using. So but it just wanted to show that, like, straw at potentially $7 a bale, it takes 2.5 bales to cover one number. So it's going to cost about $17.50 just of material to cover that one number of mulching or 200 square feet of mulching, and the payment rate might be like $24.94. Should be a payment per one number. So that's kind of how just those compare. You can see the leaf mulch, $35 a yard. But then again, like what if you're collecting your own leaves and making your own leaf mulch, or you're cutting your own straw? I'm not sure. But there's scenarios or things that happen on a farm that could definitely cut those material costs for somebody and make it a better fit, even more better fit. And then you can see the landscape fabric comparisons about how much about how much materials cost per 1,000 square feet. And I just got those off of vendors, online vendors for landscape fabric and black plastic. It seems to be landscape fabric's about $107.50 per 1,000 square feet. So if you extrapolate that down, you can kind of see the cost of material per number and how that compares to INNRCS payment rates. Any questions on that?
I'll provide a comment. I think it's interesting that the payment rate for the synthetic mulch is so much higher when time and time again in working with you, Kevin, and looking at these examples and calculating things out, that they're almost always the cost is almost always less than the natural mulch. And I know we've talked about that before, but again, I want to point out the obvious because everyone's probably looking at that. But again, I don't know why that is or how that always tends to be. But maybe with this information, we could try to get it updated for next year.
Yep. Yeah, and I guess just be cognizant too, like these are only material costs and example material costs. There's different amounts of labor that go into each applying each kind of thing, right? So leaf mulch is much more heavy than straw, so you might need some more wheelbarrows, whereas straw might be a little bit easier to spread. So different considerations. Landscape fabric might be, and black plastic might be very easy to spread. So yeah, there's just differences in labor that the folks should be cognizant of too. Stephanie?
I think that's it for we have, and my name is listed on the bottom of this wonderful document for contact information. The reason why we did that is because hopefully then that way, as we're getting questions coming up, that we can try to get them to come to one person, and I can then use that to funnel the questions and get communication from all parties that were part of this discussion today. And that way we can make sure that we're adequately answering all those questions. Whereas if you're sending it to one person and then sending it to another person and maybe not getting the responses that you need, hopefully we can try to streamline this process as well with all the hopefully streamlining we'd be doing today or talking about doing today. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think that we have come really close to the end of our meeting in actuality and time-wise and in discussion-wise as well. So any more comments or questions for the good of the audience? And Shannon, it looks like you're sharing your screen, so this is great.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who just filled out our poll. Just again, just for FYI for us and others. So looks like 16 of you responded to the poll, and several of you are dealing with multiple EQIP applications. Just as a reminder, if you need assistance or you find yourself stuck, not knowing what to do in CD or how to convert, please let us know. We'll get you an answer as soon as we can and help you move forward through that. We know that this is maybe new to you all. It's new to us, but we can work together on that. As far as how many of those are actually with mulch, only 2 of those so far is what you've indicated have mulch in them. And again, mulch is probably one of the more complicated ones and the more newer ones. My guess is back up here, probably a lot of seasonal high tunnels and other good practices that are a little more straightforward. You know what you're doing there, but if you run into any of the nutrient management or the mulch, if you worked with your farmers on that, please let us know what you're running up against. Like I said, we'll work together with you and help you navigate those next level reviews as well. So really appreciate all the hard work you all putting out there for us, for our resource, and we are in it together. So thank you so much.
In closing, Shannon, we do have that one last question from Sarah, just wanting to know when our guidance will be coming out. So I know you had given us a hard and fast deadline, and we'll still be moving forward with that, correct?
Yes, and I guess just another statement. Yeah, we want to get this guidance to you into your hands so you can use it, but don't wait on it. If you have a question, if you have a need, definitely let us know, and we'll make sure that we work with you one-on-one as needed. So that's why that was the purpose for sharing this with you, just to say, hey, we're giving you broad sideboards, and we're comfortable with that. So but if you're still stuck, again, let us know. We'll make sure that we get that to you. We don't want the process to hold up your progress, I guess is a good way to say it. So please let us know what's holding you up, and we will definitely help you navigate that and get you moving forward. To answer the question, though, again, and realistically, how guidance comes out in its final form, it will likely be to you early next week, which again, the deadline is March 18th. That doesn't give you a whole lot of time, so don't wait on it. Let us know what you're struggling with. We will definitely help you navigate those issues sooner than later.
All right, everyone. It is 3:01. You've been a wonderful group to spend part of the afternoon with. I'm glad you were able to join us. I want to say thanks to Shannon and Tony and Kevin and Jennifer for all the information you guys provided today, and thanks for helping with conversations and answering questions, and thanks to all of you attendees as well, because you're the ones, again, that we're getting this ready for and trying to get this out so you can use this. So your questions, we're going to take those questions from the chat and then kind of use those questions as we finalize this guidance document to make sure that we're all on the same page and that this document works for you. So thank you very much for your time today, and have a nice afternoon.
Great work, everybody. Thank you. Hey, team, do we know who started the recording?
Unfortunately, it was me.
Okay.
Which means that as I was booted off and on and off and on again, that I'm thinking that it probably got canceled.
I think it continued, but it may end up in your OneDrive that you will need to pull it out and get it to Chris to convert to YouTube.
Okay.
Have you done that?
No, but I think you have a guidance document on that.
Okay. So if you stop it, see if or I can stop it, whichever. But I think it's going to end up in your OneDrive, Stephanie.
Okay.